welcome to another Checiegirl Creations video. So today I will be creating an art journal page in my A5 art journal. I've been using this one for a while, so I will link any previous videos in the iCard in top right hand corner for you to watch if you're interested. So I'm going to start off with using these book paper strips, some plain and some with text on it, just to create some texture, and I also wanted that kind of neutral visual texture, which is why I'm using the book paper. And I'm going to stick this down using some PVA glue and with a palette knife. That's my favorite way to stick things down, and you'll probably know that if you've been following me for a while. And I'm doing that in those strips to kind of create a nice kind of texture. I wanted texture like going across with lines and stuff, which is why I stuck it down like that. And I'm putting them quite close together with just like a small gap. I didn't want it to be too far apart, especially since I wanted to be able to see some of the book paper once the page was finished. So I'm just adding one extra strip at the bottom, and then I'm going to cover that with a layer of chalk primer. And you can get that chalk primer in a few of my mixed media boxes, by the way. I still have a few previous boxes that are available, so I will link those down below. And I felt as if I did not have enough book paper on there and not enough texture, so I'm going in with some smaller strips and overlapping it on the strips I've already stuck down. So I'm putting like plain strips on the strips with text and the strips with text on the plain strips, just to mostly for that visual texture really. And again, I'm sticking that down with some PVA glue. And now I'm going to put some chalk primer and white paint on there. I wanted a thicker, whiter layer of texture, and I'm putting on quite a bit there because I'm going to put on a very thick layer, and I'm spreading that with my palette knife as well. So you can see that's quite thick, but you can't really see that much of the book paper now. So once I've finished doing that first layer, I'm just going to go and scrape through and add even more texture. So you can see the book paper coming through, and then you have that lovely texture as well. So I was really happy with that. So I'm just making sure those pages aren't stuck together. Normally I put a piece of paper in between to make sure. And I'm putting that extra chalk primer and paint on that tag there, which I'll probably use for something else later on. And I let that all dry naturally. So I got these little things from AliExpress, and I was wondering if it might be like kind of like microflakes kind of thing. So they weren't too much, so I just ordered them and figured might as well. And I wanted to try them out. And while I was waiting for this to dry, they came in the post. So they're supposed to be like kind of like watercolors kind of thing, but sadly they weren't very pigmented. Now I don't mind too much because I did just try it out and I bought it on a sale as well. But they were extremely light, but they are shimmery. So now I think I might try like adding it to paint, so maybe add a little bit of shimmer or going over like my watercolor paintings with them just to add some little shimmer to it whenever I want. So I bought like the colors of the rainbow as well as brown, white just for adding shimmer. And yeah, those are the colors I got. So you can see I'm putting on quite a lot. First I was only adding a little bit and then got a little bit thicker with like how much I was tapping on there. But I wasn't really happy with how it looked, but I did know I wanted to have like a flower in there. So I'm just adding some more, still trying to work it out. I'm using like pink and the purple and like the blue and the green. And still it wasn't working. So I thought I might as well just go and use some acrylic paint. So I've sprayed the page first because I did want it to be kind of like loose and watercolory a little bit. And I'm using quite a big brush. Just to put in like where the leaves and the stems are supposed to be. I put too much water on there, so I was just dabbing that up. And then I'm putting in the flowers. I'm using rose for the flowers and light yellow green, I think, is the paint for the leaves and the stems. And every time I put down a color, I splash on the page as well because I wanted that watercolor effect. Now I'm using some medium yellow to put in the middle of the flowers, and I'll add some splashes as well. And I'll also add some of that to the leaves and the stems, like kind of where the light would hit. And I put some cerulean blue, I believe, yep, cerulean blue, to like put the shading in on the leaves and the stems. And I'll also add some of that in the flowers. I've gotten used to like using a smaller color palette now, which then helps everything be a little bit more cohesive and work together, which is nice. So you don't really have to worry too much about trying to make a whole bunch of different colors work together. So, and I've put the blue in where like the shadows would be of the flowers. And I'm adding a little bit more on the stems since that kind of mixed with the pink, which made a kind of purpley color. So I thought that would be nice for shading as well. And of course, I've splashed the background. Okay, so now I'm going in with some white to add some highlights. I'm still, this page is still very wet, so I'm working wet and wet here. And then like once that's dried, I would put in more details, but I just wanted to get like the initial stuff in. So I'm dabbing in for like the middle of the flowers, on the flowers, like on the edge, as well as the leaves and the stems with that white to add those highlights and bring in some detail. And I am using quite big brushes for this because I did want it to be nice and loose and free. And I didn't want it to be too like specific with what I was doing. And now I've picked out a smaller brush. Now that everything's like dry, I do need to add in some more detail. So I'm mixing up like the blue and the green to add some details, not only where like the shadows would be, but just like completely around the stems and the leaves. And you can see me doing that there. And I'm using the smaller paintbrush just so I can get like a better point, especially when I'm doing the leaves. And at this point, I was really thinking it was looking like a huge hot mess, but I continued and I was really happy with how it turned out in the end. Sorry about that. So I've added some pink to that color I mixed before. I'm using that to add details to the flowers. So I'm adding more on like where the shadows would be. And then I'm just adding a thin line around the rest of the flower. And I'm also adding that in the middle as well. And I'm also using this opportunity just to maybe like adjust the flowers a little bit, you know, make it a bit bigger, that kind of thing. And I'm adding some more blue like where the stems would be. Just trying to make everything look right. And I'm also going to go in with some more white with that smaller brush. And this is then it's still quite wet. So you can see sometimes when you're working wet and wet, you tend to add more than you meant to. Then you have to go in back with the shadows and back in the highlights and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But I didn't mind that too much because I knew that when it came to adding details, I knew what I wanted to do, and we'll come to that in a little bit. So I'm just adding some more splashes. I thought it needed some smaller splashes, so I'm using that smaller brush with that leftover paint on my palette. And now I'm going to let that dry. So now that that's dry, I'm going to go in with my favorite detailing tool, my calligraphy pen, and some ink. And I'm going to use some black for the initial detail and especially like in the shadow areas. So again, I am going completely around the flowers and the leaves. And I'm adding some like stippling in the middle of the flowers, but where the shadows would be, I'll add some little bit more lines and scribbles, and you'll see those in the photos at the end, so you can see that in more detail. And now I'm just like bringing out the stems, especially all the stems kind of seem to get like smushed together. So I wanted to bring that out, give the leaves, especially the leaves, some more definition. And those stems really did need some definition. It all just looked like one big blob. But this is when I really started to like how it turned out. And you can see I'm adding some more like scribbly lines, kind of sketchy lines on the flowers, just so you can really see where the shadows would be. And this is like the brilliant thing about adding detail. Like you can do a really messy background and just bring out everything with your detail. And adding black, especially for detailing grounds, whatever you're doing, and then adding light white or any light color will then bring it out and add some really nice highlights. And I'm just adding some splashes. I wet the brush and then we're just kind of flicking it on the calligraphy pen just to use up the extra ink because it needed some darker splashes in the background. And now I'm going in with my Uniball Signal to add the finishing highlights and finishing touches and details. So you can see how that really pops. Yes, so I'm just finishing off. I am adding some highlights like in the shadow areas, but that's really just for the detail. And I'm just splashing on some white. Felt like I needed to brighten up some of the background as well. And I was really loving how it looked, but I felt like it wasn't finished. So I'm just quickly signing the page, and now I'm going to edge the page with the ink using the calligraphy pen. And that's when I really liked it, because then I added a border, and that just helped ground everything and bring it all together. So I was really happy with that, and I loved how it turned out in the end. So thank you very much for watching. We're coming to the end of the video now, so if you liked it, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and please don't forget to click that bell so you get notified whenever I upload a new video. I want to thank all my subscribers who have been sticking with me. It really means a lot to me. And don't forget to check out my past mixed media boxes. I'll link that all below. Oh, and there'll most likely, when this video is out, be some kind of sales, most likely January sale. So keep an eye out for that as well. Oh, I'm just adding some gold there as well. So thanks again for watching, and please join me again for another arty video. Bye!